All right, patient care part 3. We're going to talk about image requirements and modifying of the image. The image must include patient ID, patient identification, and then anatomic markings, so your left and right markers. Ideally, your left and right lead markers are placed at the time of exposure. Markings placed on the image following exposure, so your electronic markers that might be on your electronic system on your station that you place after the fact, they might not be legally admissible. So ideally try and get your markers on at the time of exposure. Don't use your electronic markers just because they're easier. Ideally, carefully place your markers ideally out of anatomy. We require lateral border. I don't know if that's everybody, but. And then date of exposure. Something to keep in mind is that radiographic images are legal documents, whether they're electronic or film. They belong to the institution that produced them, not the patient. So your x-rays do not belong to the patient. They belong to wherever they were produced. So the hospital, the urgent care, wherever they were, all right? Manipulation of electronic data is something I feel like we're coming into and need maybe a little bit more information about, but let's start with exposure indicator. Your EI range, as a technologist, you should know what an acceptable EI range is for your equipment. And as we know, it's a little frustrating because they're all different. If you're using CR, it'll be an S number. And remember, S numbers are inverse relationship. ER is a direct relationship, so a high number is overexposed, low not enough. But you have to be able to know what the target range is. So EIT is exposure index target. All equipment does not use the same terminology. It makes that a little bit different. Processing algorithm. We are supposed to process the image under the correct processing algorithm. When you acquire the image on your selector, so you're supposed to choose PHS and process PHS under that algorithm. You're not supposed to reprocess it under different things. And then brightness and contrast are something that you can adjust post-processing as a technologist. So when it comes up on your screen, you can use your kind of options to adjust the contrast using the window width and then window level for brightness. And not all machines, you have to kind of choose them separately. It depends on which way you're moving your mouse, up and down or left to right, that will change those. And then cropping or masking off of anatomy. So the purpose of cropping or masking is to reduce the eye fatigue of the viewer or the radiologist caused by the high brightness levels in the image. So really, cropping and masking is supposed to kind of cut off those white borders on the outsides. Cropping is not supposed to be used to bring in sort of your image to make it look prettier after the exposure. So you should be collimating at time of exposure. You shouldn't be collimating after the fact. So here's kind of an example here. So the picture on the left is what was sent to the radiologist, but the picture on the right was the initial exposure. This was a neck image. And what happened was the technologist wanted to make it look better, so they cropped it in before they sent it to look like this. So that was a nicely coned in neck image. What they did was they coned off a fracture of the clavicle, and so that can be missed. So you don't want to crop this off. If you've exposed this anatomy, it should be sent and it should be read. So I understand you might want to make your image look a little bit better for the radiologist, but it's really important that we understand that the collimating should happen prior to the exposure and not afterwards. And if it was exposed, it should be read.